It begins quietly, no shouting, no bruises, no obvious scars that others can see. Just a child, sitting in a familiar room, eyes wide, scanning the faces of the adults around them while their little heart slowly shrinks in silence. A parent might be too busy, too tired, too distracted, or simply too broken to notice. And day after day, hour after hour, the child absorbs an invisible lesson. My feelings don't matter. If I'm sad, no one cares. If I'm happy, no one shares it with me. It's safer if I stay quiet. This is how a child disappears, not physically, but psychologically. Their body is still there, but their tears are swallowed. Their joy is hidden. Their fears are never named. Slowly they learn to fade into the background, becoming the shadow in their own home, watching, waiting, careful not to disturb anyone. And the paradox is this: the world often praises them for it. You're such a good kid, so well behaved, so easy, but no one ever asks, what did it cost you to be so good? This is the silent grief of emotionally neglected children. It doesn't scream, it doesn't leave visible wounds, but it lingers deeper and longer than anyone suspects. Because while physical abuse can leave scars on the skin, emotional neglect leaves emptiness inside the soul, and that emptiness is harder to detect, harder to name, and harder to heal. Imagine this: a child feels fear for the first time, yet no one comes to comfort them. A child runs home with joy, but no one mirrors their excitement. A child cries out, but instead of being held, they hear, "Stop it, you're fine." Over and over, year after year, those subtle dismissals carve a message into the child's heart. Your emotions are too much. Your needs don't belong. Hide them. And so invisibility takes root. Not invisibility to society, but invisibility to the very people who should have seen them most. As these children grow, they carry with them a strange kind of emptiness. They smile when they don't feel happy. They stay silent when they desperately want to speak. They act strong while trembling inside. And the world applauds them, so mature, so independent, so resilient. But the truth is, their maturity was not a choice. It was a consequence of what was missing. This is not a rare story. Millions of adults today walk through life carrying the marks of emotional neglect. They enter relationships but still feel disconnected. They achieve success but quietly wonder, do I really matter to anyone? They laugh in groups but come home to a haunting loneliness because they were never taught how to trust their own feelings. And here lies another tragedy. Emotional neglect rarely comes from cruelty. Most parents don't set out to hurt their children. Many were emotionally neglected themselves. They may provide food, shelter, and education. They may even love their children deeply. But love without attunement can still wound. Because a child doesn't just need safety on the outside, they need to feel safe on the inside. That's why this wound is so invisible and so dangerous. There is no single traumatic event to point to. Instead, it's defined by absence, the countless small moments of being unseen, unheard, unacknowledged. And those absences create not only lonely adults, but adults who doubt themselves, who mistrust their feelings, and who sometimes unknowingly pass the same silence on to the next generation. So when we talk about the psychology of emotionally neglected children, we are not just describing sadness. We are shining a light on the shadows of the human heart, because only when we name it can we begin to heal it. And that is what we'll explore together, the inner world of the invisible child. The child who grew up without enough of the simple, vital truth: your feelings matter, you matter. So what exactly is emotional neglect? It's not obvious. It doesn't shout. It doesn't leave scars you can photograph. Most people think of neglect as physical: an empty fridge, a child left alone, clothes too small for their body. But emotional neglect is different. It hides in plain sight. It's not defined by what happens. It's defined by what doesn't. No one hits you. No one yells at you. Instead, no one notices. A child says, "I'm scared." No one comforts them. A child says, "I'm happy." No one celebrates with them. A child says nothing at all because they've already learned no one will listen, and slowly the message settles in. My feelings don't matter. Maybe I don't matter. Psychologists like Dr. Jonice Webb describe emotional neglect as the failure to respond enough to a child's emotional needs. Notice that word, enough, because no parent is perfect, no parent gets it right all the time. But when a child consistently feels unseen, unheard, or dismissed, the result is not resilience, it's invisibility. Think of childhood as building a home inside yourself. Every moment of comfort, every time someone listens, every time someone mirrors your joy, it's like placing furniture in that house. It becomes warm, alive, a place you can return to when life feels heavy. But if those moments are missing, the house is still there, but it's empty. You can walk through it, room by room, and find nothing but bare walls. That's what emotional neglect feels like. A life that looks intact on the outside, but hollow on the inside. And here's the cruel twist. Because there was no dramatic event, no violent outburst, no traumatic scene to replay, many emotionally neglected children grow up not even realizing what happened to them. They don't say, "I was hurt." They say, "I'm fine." But fine is a mask. Underneath, there is often a quiet ache, a sense that something essential was missing, but they can't quite put it into words. Over time, this silence shapes how they see themselves. They may struggle to understand or name their feelings. They may become overly independent, afraid to rely on anyone. They may doubt their worth, convinced that asking for love is too much. It's like growing up in a desert of connection. You survive, but survival is not the same as thriving. And perhaps the hardest part is that emotional neglect is often unintentional. Parents may love their children deeply. They may provide food, safety, education, but love without attunement can still wound. A father who says, "Stop crying, you're fine," may believe he's teaching strength. A mother who says, "Calm down, it's not a big deal," may think she's helping her child stay grounded. But to the child, these moments carry another message. Don't trust your feelings. Don't trust yourself. And when that message repeats over and over, it doesn't just silence emotions, it erodes identity. Because our feelings are not flaws, they're signals. They're how we know ourselves, how we connect, how we belong. Strip those signals away, and you don't just lose comfort, you lose a part of your humanity. This is what makes emotional neglect so insidious. It's quiet, it's ordinary, and that's why so many people dismiss it. But the truth is, being unseen can wound just as deeply as being hurt. So if you've ever felt like you were walking through life with an invisible emptiness inside, if you've ever wondered why joy feels fragile, why relationships feel distant, why silence feels heavy, this may be why. Because childhood emotional neglect isn't just the absence of love, it's the absence of being known. And that absence shapes everything that follows. When a child grows up in the silence of emotional neglect, they don't simply stop expressing. Their survival instinct pushes them to adapt. And the way they do it is by creating masks. The first mask is that of the perfect child. This child learns that if unconditional love is out of reach, then maybe achievement can buy it. Grades, trophies, politeness, and obedience become their armor. On the surface, they shine. Inside, they whisper, "I'll only be worthy if I never fail." Studies confirm this pattern. Children raised in environments low in emotional responsiveness show higher rates of perfectionism linked to anxiety and depression. The second mask is that of the invisible one. This child survives by shrinking. They walk lightly, speak rarely, and keep their needs hidden. In school, they are the quiet one. At home, they try not to take up space. Over time, this silence becomes a way of life. The American Psychological Association notes that such self-suppression can contribute to alexithymia, the difficulty of identifying and expressing emotions, which often leads to chronic loneliness, even in the middle of relationships. The third mask is that of the rebel. From the outside, they look disruptive, defiant, troublemakers, but underneath their rebellion is a cry for recognition. If being good doesn't make anyone notice them, maybe being bad will. Even punishment feels better than being invisible. Research on neglected children created in Attachment Theory and Child Neglect, 2008, found that many act out not out of malice, but because negative attention is still attention. 3 masks, 3 survival strategies, but all born from the same wound. The fear that one's emotions and one's very self don't matter. The tragedy is that these masks don't vanish when childhood ends. The perfect child becomes the perfectionistic adult, endlessly working, achieving, burning out, yet never feeling enough. The invisible one becomes the withdrawn adult, avoiding conflict, hiding vulnerability, and struggling to be truly known. The rebel becomes the self-sabotaging adult, pushing others away before they can leave. On the surface, they may look completely different. One is the high achiever, one is quiet and accommodating, one is bold and defiant. But beneath the surface, they share the same thread, a loneliness seeded in childhood when their emotions were dismissed. Swiss psychologist Carl Jung once wrote, "The mask we wear is not our true self, but the image we needed to survive." These childhood masks once protected the child, but in adulthood they become chains limiting intimacy, trust, and authenticity. And here lies the painful paradox. Society often praises these masks. The perfectionist is admired as hardworking. The invisible one is called easygoing. The rebel is labeled independent or strong-willed, but few see what lies beneath. A heart that once longed to be seen, to be heard, to matter. So, if you've ever wondered, why do I never feel enough? Why do I always stay quiet? Why do I push people away? The answer may not be who you are, but who you learn to be. Because these masks are not your essence. They are strategies. They were necessary then, but they are not your destiny now. And the moment you recognize them, you take the first step toward setting them down, toward telling that inner child, you don't have to hide anymore. You deserve to be seen. The masks of childhood may save a child, but when adulthood arrives, they leave scars that are harder to see and harder to heal. Adults who grow up emotionally neglected carry with them an invisible burden, a hollow house inside the soul, and this absence seeps into every corner of their lives. In relationships, they often feel disconnected even when surrounded by people who love them. Many describe it as standing in a crowded room yet feeling invisible. They long for closeness, but at the same time, they fear it. A 2018 study in the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships found that adults who experience childhood emotional neglect are more likely to struggle with trust and intimacy because, as children, they learned that emotions were not safe to share. In their careers, they may become the quiet heroes, reliable, hard-working, high-achieving, but behind every success lies an unshakable whisper, "I'm never enough." This relentless drive for perfection often leads to emotional burnout, one of the most common consequences reported in adults with histories of emotional neglect. Inside themselves, they wrestle with a nameless emptiness, Not quite sadness, not quite anger, more like wandering through a house with no furniture, walls, and a roof intact, but no warmth, no life. Therapists often call this chronic emptiness, a hallmark of those who were unseen and unheard as children. In the body, the effects are equally profound. According to a scientific study in 2015, prolonged loneliness has been proven to be as harmful to the body as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Adults who were emotionally neglected often face higher risks of depression, anxiety, insomnia, and even cardiovascular disease. Why? Because as children, their nervous systems were wired for survival. Cortisol, the stress hormone, was produced at higher levels, becoming toxic over time, quietly reshaping both brain and body. But perhaps the most devastating consequence is self-blame. Because there was no dramatic event to point to, many adults don't recognize what happened as neglect. They don't say, "I was harmed." Instead, they think, "Something must be wrong with me." Psychologist Janice Webb, in her book Running on Empty, explains, children of emotional neglect don't remember what happened. They remember what didn't happen. And in that absence, they often conclude that their needs are flaws, that wanting comfort is weakness, that their very self is too much. This distorted self-perception locks many into cycles of unhealthy relationships. Some become people pleasers, constantly giving more than they receive, afraid to say no, terrified of rejection. Others become avoidant, refusing to get too close, fearing that intimacy will only bring pain. Think of it this way. A child who never heard the words, "Are you okay?" grows into an adult who wonders, "Do I matter?" A child who was told to silence their feelings becomes an adult who mistrusts their own heart. A child who learned that their emotions were burdens grows into an adult who feels like they are the burden. The greatest wound of emotional neglect is not weakness, it is invisibility. These adults live, work, and love, yet deep down, they carry the sense that they have never truly been known. And yet, recognition is the beginning of healing, because when you finally put a name to the emptiness, when you can say, "Yes, I was emotionally neglected, but that doesn't define my worth," the silence begins to break. As Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." By naming neglect, by pulling it into the light, you begin to loosen its grip. And in that moment, the cycle of invisibility starts to fracture. If emotional neglect creates an emptiness inside the soul, then within that emptiness lives a child who never truly grew up. Adults may change jobs, build relationships, raise families, even achieve dazzling success, yet deep inside remains an inner child whispering, "Why didn't anyone ever protect me?" The concept of the inner child is not fantasy. In humanistic psychology and Gestalt therapy, it refers to the emotional parts of ourselves that remain frozen in time, especially the parts that were dismissed or denied in childhood. Psychologist John Bradshaw described it as the authentic self that was wounded and abandoned. For those who endured emotional neglect, this inner child was never nurtured by comfort or recognition. Instead, it was locked away in silence. We may believe we've forgotten the past, but the body and nervous system never forget. Research in attachment theory shows that when a child's need for comfort goes unmet, the brain encodes defensive patterns, avoidance, suppression, or fear of intimacy that carry into adult relationships. The inner child makes itself known in subtle, often confusing ways. When a small rejection feels overwhelming, as if abandonment has returned. When a compliment feels unbearable, because deep down you never believed you deserved it. When you feel compelled to please others, simply to secure a fragile sense of safety. These are not signs of weakness, they are echoes of unmet needs. Modern neuroscience offers hope. Studies on neuroplasticity show that the brain can adapt and rewire throughout life. This means that the pathways carved by invisibility and self-denial are not destiny. By reparenting the inner child, by acknowledging it, listening to it, and offering what was once missing, adults can form new neural connections tied to safety, compassion, and self-worth. But healing begins with courage. Because listening to the inner child means opening doors to grief long locked away. It means allowing yourself to weep for birthdays where no one came, to rage over moments of being ignored, to mourn a childhood never fully lived. As Carl Jung once wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." And here lies the paradox. What once made you feel small and invisible can become your greatest strength if you dare to face it. When you turn inward and tell that child, "You deserve to be heard. You are no longer abandoned. I am here with you now," the cycle of neglect begins to break. Because the truth is this: your inner child never needed you to be perfect. It only needed you to be present with compassion and patience. And when the adult you are today can finally offer that, the child you once were is finally allowed to come home. Recognizing the inner child is the beginning, but healing doesn't stop there. If emotional neglect once made you disappear into silence, then healing is the act of allowing yourself to reappear, to take up space, to be present again. The key truth is this: healing is not about erasing the past. It is about learning to live differently in the present. You cannot rewrite your childhood, but you can rewrite how you treat yourself now. And often, that begins with the smallest of steps. One of the most powerful tools therapists recommend is emotion journaling. It may sound simple, almost too simple, but for someone who grew up emotionally neglected, it is revolutionary. Because neglect robs children of the language of feelings, journaling is how you begin to give that language back to yourself. Here's how it works. Each day, set aside 5 to 10 minutes and answer one question on paper. What am I feeling right now? At first, your answers may be vague. Tired, fine, stressed. But as you practice, your vocabulary expands. Disappointed, inspired, anxious but hopeful. Slowly, the fog lifts and emotions you once buried begin to take shape. Research supports this. A 2007 study by Matthew Lieberman and colleagues, Psychological Science, found that simply labeling emotions can reduce activity in the amygdala, the brain's fear center, while activating the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for regulation and decision-making. In other words, naming your feelings helps calm them. You can expand this exercise with 2 additional questions. What is this feeling trying to tell me? How can I respond to it as a friend rather than as an enemy? For example, if you write, "I feel anxious," you might realize the anxiety is signaling that you need more preparation for tomorrow's meeting. Instead of attacking yourself for being nervous, you might write back, "Thank you for reminding me. I'll take some time to prepare." This is the essence of self-reparenting, becoming the attentive caregiver to yourself that you once needed. Some therapists even suggest writing in the second person, as if speaking directly to your inner child. "You're scared today. And that's okay. I hear you. You're sad because you felt ignored. You have every right to feel that way." At first, these words may feel awkward, even artificial, but repeated daily, they begin to rewire the way you relate to yourself. Psychologist Kristin Neff, a pioneer in the field of self-compassion, has shown that treating ourselves with kindness rather than criticism significantly reduces anxiety, improves resilience, and increases overall life satisfaction. Healing, then, is not a dramatic overnight transformation. It is a practice. Each time you sit down to name an emotion, each time you answer it with patience instead of judgment, you are placing one more piece of furniture inside the empty house of your childhood. And gradually, the house begins to change. No longer just bare walls echoing with silence, but rooms that hold warmth, color, and life. Because ultimately, healing is not about becoming someone new. Healing is about returning to the child who once longed to be seen, heard, and loved. And this time, you are the one who shows up. When we talk about childhood emotional neglect, the focus is often on the wounds, the loneliness, the emptiness, the silence. But that is not the whole story. Within those wounds, something else often takes root. A hidden capacity, an unusual sensitivity that, when nurtured, can become a profound strength. Research has shown that people who endured emotional neglect in childhood often develop heightened emotional intelligence, particularly in the form of empathy. Because they grew up in environments where their own emotions went unnoticed, they learned to read others more carefully. A 2018 study from the University of Cambridge found that individuals who experienced emotional deprivation in childhood were often more attuned to subtle emotional cues than others, a kind of emotional radar born out of survival. This is why many who were once invisible become remarkable listeners, empathetic friends, or deeply creative souls. They know what loneliness feels like, and precisely because of that, they carry the ability to make others feel seen. As Khalil Gibran once wrote, "Out of suffering have emerged the strongest souls. The most massive characters are seared with scars." Of course, this is not to romanticize pain. Neglect leaves real scars. But it is to recognize that what once silenced you can also shape your deepest strengths. Sensitivity, once dismissed as weakness, can become the very trait that allows you to connect, to create, and to heal. In fact, many therapists, counselors, and healers trace their calling back to childhoods of neglect. What once wounded them later drove them to understand human pain more deeply and to transform that understanding into service. A survey conducted by the American Counseling Association, 2020, found that a significant percentage of mental health professionals reported difficult or neglectful early experiences, which in turn enhanced their capacity for empathy and trust building with clients. But the crucial point is this: recognizing hidden strengths does not mean denying the wound. You don't need to pretend that neglect was a gift or be grateful for it. Healing does not require you to minimize your suffering. Instead, it invites you to look at the sensitivity it left behind and ask, how can I use this in a way that nourishes me, and perhaps others as well? Perhaps you once felt invisible, now you can notice the ones who are overlooked. Perhaps you were once dismissed, now you can be the person who says, I hear you. And sometimes, a simple act of presence, asking someone, are you okay, can carry the power to change a life. Ultimately, healing is not only about turning inward, but also about expanding outward. When you learn to care for your inner child, you also learn how to care for the inner child in others. This is how cycles of neglect are broken, not through perfection or erasing the past, but through the ordinary, repeated choice to connect instead of withdraw, to show kindness instead of indifference, to be present instead of absent. As Carl Rogers, the father of humanistic psychology, once said, the curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change. The same is true here. When you accept that you were neglected, that it hurt you, but that it does not define you, then you begin to transform. If childhood emotional neglect made you grow up in invisibility, then adulthood is your chance to write a different story. Pain does not vanish simply because you ignore it. It lingers as invisible ink in the pages of your life. But now, you hold the pen. You can decide that the next chapter does not have to repeat the old one. Research in narrative therapy shows that retelling your life story from a new perspective, with compassion rather than self-blame, can profoundly reshape your sense of self. A meta-analysis published in the Journal of Systemic Therapies 2016 found that rewriting the narrative helps individuals step out of the victim identity and instead build a self-concept rooted in strength and possibility. This means that instead of saying, "I am someone unworthy of love," you can reframe it as, "I am someone who learned to survive without love, and now I deserve it." The power of rewriting lies not in erasing the past, but in placing it in context. It belongs to a chapter, not the whole book. Friedrich Viktor Frankl, Holocaust survivor and author of Man's Search for Meaning, wrote, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. This is the ultimate freedom, the choice of how we respond to what happened to us." If neglect once taught you that your feelings didn't matter, healing begins with affirming, "My feelings matter. I matter." If you once lived in an empty house, then today every small act of self-recognition is like placing a piece of furniture inside it. Even simple practices can help you rewrite your story. Research on gratitude journaling shows that writing down 3 things you're grateful for each day can significantly increase well-being and reduce symptoms of depression. Gratitude doesn't deny pain, it reframes your life. So it is not defined only by what you lacked, but also by what you still hold. And slowly you begin to notice the shift. You are no longer living merely to survive, but to be present. You can speak without fearing you'll be ignored. You can cry without shame. You can feel joy without restraint. You can love without losing yourself. This is not about becoming a new person. It is about returning to the self that was once hidden. It is rebirth, not replacement. And when you do this, you are not only healing yourself, you become living proof that pain does not have to be destiny. You open a door for others, the ones who also felt invisible, to see that there is another future, another way of being, another chapter waiting to be written. As the poet Rumi wrote, "The wound is the place where the light enters you. Through the wound, light finds its way in. And once the light is within you, you are no longer just a child who was neglected. You are the adult who is alive, writing, and shining in your own voice." If you've ever carried the quiet weight of being unseen, know this: you are not broken, and you are not alone. Healing doesn't happen overnight, but every small step, every moment you choose to listen to yourself is proof of your strength. If this video resonated with you, I invite you to stay connected by subscribing and sharing it with someone who might need these words today. Together, we can create a space where no one feels invisible.